we are here to discuss a challenge that is one of the hardest problems that we face today, and it's a growing problem. The issue of climate change and how we turn things around to be able to address it and stop it from growing. We know that right now with climate change, if it remains unchecked, it is the crisis that we are facing today, it's going to grow. And in 2015, there was a new agreement to do something about that brought together countries from all over the world around climate change. And this was a very bottom-up process that brought countries to define plans of action to deal with the climate change challenge. And currently, as you know, the recent report that came out in October by the Intergovernmental Panel report, it's telling us that the problem is growing, that we need to do more, that there are insufficient actions being taken, whether by business, by government, and by communities. And in this issue of climate change, businesses have a huge responsibility. I mean, some figures put that we account for the businesses for 75% of the problem. So this is important for our management school at McGill to hold this conversation, and we're very happy to have Mike Gerbis here, who has been working all over Canada with business and government on these issues. So thank you very much for being with us here tonight. One of the aspects that we want to address is this effort by Canada as part of this climate change agreement. Canada has also developed its own plan. You know, this is part of the characteristic of the climate change accord. In fact, it's sort of the nature of what made it a successful agreement. One of the natures that enabled this agreement to occur is because each country can develop its own plan. So today, we want to delve deeper into what Canada is doing. It established its pan-Canadian framework on clean growth, on climate change. And more recently, it also created an updated plan and set up several innovation funds to move businesses, to move municipal governments, to move provincial governments to do something about these issues. So this is the context of our conversation today with Mike. Now, before we get started, Mike, with questions, I would like to ask you if you can introduce us a bit about your organization and what Delphi is doing.
Great. Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming out on this cold evening. First, before I just give you a 2-minute on the organizations I represent, just curious on the audience, how many students? Any students? And profs? Okay, I'll watch you guys, okay. And public, general public? Okay, great, okay. So I'm the CEO. You heard 2 companies. I actually oversee 4 organizations, and I'm really proud of this. This is a new business model that we've taken called the Constellation model. So these 4 organizations are all independent entities. They have their own mission, but they all are directed towards a common vision. And that common vision is to create a sustainable, prosperous, and socially just future in a generation. And I say that in a generation because of what was said earlier about climate change. That it's something I've been involved in now for 20-some years and studied extensively, and it is the #1 challenge that we face. But it is something that can be solved. And so the model here is to try to bring together different organizations that are focused on making positive change. So the consulting group, Delphi, works with municipal, provincial, federal government, and corporations across all sectors of society. climate change risk management, corporate sustainability, clean innovation, and green economic growth. Those are our areas of focus. The Globe series is about convening, because together, well, to solve this problem, we have to come together. And so Globe series convenes large conferences like our Globe Forum conference, which is the largest sustainability conference in North America, or small, intimate, and influential conversations. Like last year, we had 18 of the largest company CEOs together with the finance minister, Minister of Environment, and Premier. So convening is key. The third component, which a number of you are part of, that I think is essential to solving this problem, is youth, is that next generation. And Leading Change is an organization that is there to activate leadership and help young people get the skills and knowledge they need to make positive change. And the final organization is called the XL Partnership, which is a peer-to-peer learning organization. And it brings together, there are 16 members at the moment, the largest companies in Canada, their VPs of sustainability or environment, to share lessons learned, best practices, and again, to accelerate the change within their organization. So that's a model that we've started, and we hope to add other organizations, not by merging or purchasing, but by inviting them in to grow our influence and impact and really make a difference. So thank you very much, Paola, for having me here. Thank you, Megan, and everyone for organizing. Really appreciate it, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you. So you talk about convening, bringing different public, private, plural organizations together. How do you engage them? In the sense that, how do you make the case? The recent report from the IPCC is telling us we're not doing enough. We need to do more. So how do you make the case? Why should more organizations become engaged on issues of sustainability? Why should they be more engaged on addressing the problems of climate change?
Right. So the one thing, when I started early in my career, I would go at these companies based on the ethical, moral, environmental issue, and that didn't work so well. And it still doesn't work well with a lot of cases, because what drives, I'll talk about private sector first, but private sector is risk and reward. And this is the business case that I often talk. I was talking to these great students here earlier today about that to get companies engaged in talking about the issue, you need to bring them to the table along with civil society and government and clean technology firms, but to align them with what's most important to them. And for private sector, that's making money or reducing risk. And so that lens is used all the time. So risk is things like having your production disrupted if you're a mining company and all of a sudden you have a 500-year flood, or the disruption of your tailings pond and what's that going to cost you. Or the opportunity, right, to reduce fuel use and save money, or to engage your employees and attract good employees, or gain market share through new products. So always aligned with their business priorities is a number one item to bring people together to talk about that.
Right. So the director of the IPCC report says that we need to turn the economy on a dime. And that, in a sense, inspired the title of our talk this evening. So I would like to ask you, can you indicate whether this turning the economy on a dime is on a wide basis? Do you see it as something that's possible?
That's possible. So the hopeful side of me says yes. Okay, the technologies that we have already in place can reduce our emissions significantly. The challenge is deployment and changing not only behavior, but also institutional structures, right? We are driven by fossil fuels, our economy, we heat our homes, we drive our cars, right? And there's a time lapse, even just to change the design of a car, from one style to another, let alone from gas to electricity. However, we've seen this before where we were asked to go to the moon. We've been asked to tackle challenges like AIDS, and we've turned. We've focused the innovation and the ingenuity, right, and come together from all walks of life to solve issues and solve them fairly rapidly. And I think this can be done. But it needs massive investments, right? Massive change in behavior, massive change in the infrastructure that we have. So we need to electrify our grid, electrify our transportation, or get onto other fuels, hydrogen, right, ethanol. We need to increase building standards rapidly. So we're building homes that are net zero, right? We need to invest in renewable energy, and so on and so forth. It can be done, and it can be done with technologies that we have today. We just need to accelerate the influx of capital and our action very quickly.
So if we already have ways to approach this problem, what is keeping the companies from doing it? I mean, assuming, say, that investment, I mean, Canada has put in its plan investment funds, and assuming that we already have some sense as to what needs to be done, as you say, then what keeps companies from doing more? What is holding us back?
So that's a complex question, but I'll try to give a few examples. First and foremost is our economic system, right? So we're driven by profit. And in North America, even much more so than Europe, that reports on an annual basis, often companies here report on a quarterly basis, which means we're making decisions that are very short-term. They're short-sighted in the sense that we will deploy capital, but we need a return on investment. We need to get our money back plus interest in 3 years, 1.5 years. And that just doesn't work when you need to make huge transitional changes to your infrastructure, right? Or to your building even, right? To retrofit this building, you can probably get a return on investment for lights, for LED, maybe in 1.5 years. But if you're doing the envelope and the windows, you're talking 7, 11, 12 years, right? So short-term versus long-term outlook is one. Two is we got to remember, and I said this to the students today, right, is we often point the finger and say industry is bad, oil and gas is bad, retail is bad. When we point the finger, 3 are pointing back at us, right? They're producing products that we're buying. We're buying new cell phones every year, right? We're buying the new vehicle. And we have to take responsibility for our actions. And that's tough. Change in behavior is tough. You know, I want to go on vacation with my family, so I go rather than getting a divorce with my wife, right? Okay? Or upsetting my kids, right? Or I do business, and I have to fly around the country and go to Europe to the climate conference to do business, but I'm adding a whole bunch of emissions there, right? So there's fundamental components of our system that we're kind of locked in, and we have to change that significantly.
Right, so on this issue of change is where your company has been doing a lot of work, and you've been doing different strategies around mitigation, around adaptation, around issues of green economy. So what, could you give us some examples of ways in which your work is enabling the companies? How do you work then to move them along in these areas of infrastructural change, or in the ways in which they're doing their processes?
Yeah. So it varies significantly depending upon the client and where they're at, right? So we work with leading companies that are really at the forefront of change and trying to drive their businesses to become more sustainable. So with those companies, that's where we're at the what we call the bleeding edge, right? So we're trying to help them, for example, innovate faster, innovate differently, invest in new technologies, artificial intelligence, for example. Where can that help? One company, we're working with them to electrify their entire mine site, right? Using AI and sophisticated equipment, go to electric vehicles, right? Secondly, you'll get those companies that are, let's call them followers. They're mid-level. They want to make sure they meet the regulations. They want to do incremental change, right? There, we're trying to push them in areas of efficiency, or just set targets, or just have an employee engagement program where they're engaging their employees to take action. And these are, again, business cases that we make with each company, right? So we have to understand the culture and understand what they're willing to do. Are they willing to really go out there in front and be a leader? I'll give you an example. We just started working with a large financial institution that is, they want to be front and center, a leader. And so we're helping them develop a strategic plan that has two components. One, a sustainability side, and two, a climate risk analysis over their portfolio. That's fantastic. But many others are not going to go that far. They don't want to be out front. So again, we're always looking to engage the company, understand their culture, understand their priority, and then create the business case that makes sense for sustainability or climate change to be integrated into that corporation.
So you say innovate faster. And it's really interesting when you read the Canadian framework and its contribution to the climate change agreement, Canada's commitment. Innovation appears everywhere. And that makes sense because we're talking about changing what we're doing, how we're doing it. It means changing our products, changing our processes, changing our organizations. So I can definitely see how central this is. So when you say innovating faster, can you give us some examples of what facilitates that faster innovation? And can you also give us some examples of where you're seeing Canada really moving forward as an innovator in this area around clean technology or around green economy? I mean, how is Canada doing? Which sectors? Where are you seeing areas where you're feeling this excited and where we can really learn from to see how we can facilitate more of that in other sectors or locations?
Okay. So I'll start with the first part on companies. Canada is tremendous at creating new ideas and startups. We have a number of fascinating technology, not only on the IT AI side, but on the clean tech side. And we have some companies that are growing very fast in areas of interest to help us address the climate change. And I'll just give you a few. Enerchem is a local company, does municipal waste to ethanol, methanol. Very interesting. Carbon Cure out in Vancouver, which takes CO2 and recycles it into cement to drive down CO2 emissions. Agriculture, we're very good. There's Terramera, and Farmer's Edge. Right? These are digitalization technologies to make, say, the application of water, right, to the fields very precise. Drive the tractors in line with GPS, again, so you have less loss, et cetera, et cetera. Very fascinating. Where Canada has fallen down in the past, and this is no disrespect to these great companies or others that are doing really well, is that we have a challenge in scaling and then deploying the technology and then exporting the technology. And I'm not saying we don't have great companies doing that. We have lots of great companies doing that. But where we've struggled is in that area. So what you've seen in the last few years is the Canadian government, provincial governments, and the industry come together to try to find ways to accelerate that, right? To overcome those challenges and to be able to scale our industry and deploy it faster. So the federal government put $2 billion into clean technology and moved it into areas like Sustainable Development Technology Canada, which helps companies demonstrate their technology, which is a key barrier. EDC and BDC, two large crown corps that help companies, again, scale and then export their technologies and put it into funds. We're seeing industry organizations come together and work together and share IP around technology innovation. So this is fascinating, where they're kind of putting aside the competitiveness part to work and have a one window access to their companies around technologies, which again reduces the barriers. And then we have groups, accelerators in that across the country that are working with these small companies to educate them, right? A lot of startups, the founders often don't know what they don't know. And this causes friction when they have to raise capital and they don't know how to do that or market their technology. And these accelerators across the country are working with them to educate them, mentor them, provide them guidance so that they can grow faster. So lots of good stuff going on.
Yeah, so this is interesting. You mentioned collective efforts by companies. Recently, Canada went through all of the negotiations over the trade agreements, renegotiating the North American Free Trade Agreement, and this brought to light the challenge that Canada faces also in terms of diversifying its markets. And so I'm wondering here whether you've seen that there is, and usually trade issues bring collective efforts, I mean, between companies. So I'm wondering if you have seen any convergence between this concern for diversifying Canada's economy and the issues of sustainability and innovation. Do you see any ways in which maybe these industry associations may be moving in this direction, or is there a way that we could foster more integration, actually? Because from the one hand, Canada is saying we have this plan. On the other hand, economically, we talk about diversification. Are these two parallel things, or how can they be integrated more?
Yeah, absolutely, they're integrated, right? This is the key, is if we transition our economy, right, to a clean economy, a low carbon, sustainable economy, that means we can't continue to do what we've been doing for 100 years, right? We need to do it differently. And so to do that, we need new technologies, new solutions, new processes to work. So if we're going to continue to produce oil and gas, then we need to figure out new ways that we can use them that don't contribute to CO2 in the atmosphere. If we're going to mine materials that are essential to our economy and our prosperity, we need to figure out ways to do that more sustainably. And this works to Canada's favor, because if we can develop, well, let me stop and say, a lot of our knowledge and expertise in the clean tech sector is aligned to our main industries, right? So we are good at innovating for agriculture, good at innovating in the resource sectors. So if we can do that, we not only help our Canadian companies become more competitive, more sustainable, but then we can turn around and export these technologies to other countries, right? So it's a win-win-win all the way across.
Are there examples already where you see Canada being competitive in export markets linked to clean technologies, green economy activities?
Yeah, there are several. Again, we have a number of technologies in areas such as small hydro, in the oil and gas sector, digitalization areas, waste management, water, another one, good water. Again, we're very good at niche technology. So you'll find Canadian expertise across all parts of the economy that we're doing very well.
Yeah. All right. So turning attention to government, you're talking about enabling conditions, and the plans put out multi-billion-dollar funds for the green economy and clean technology. How does the articulation between these government initiatives and business get going? How can this get going faster? And I'm wondering here, how informed are both sides in terms of what the firms need in order to be able to address the innovation challenge, and whether firms are also knowledgeable about what the government is, the resources that the government has put out there, or promised anyway, to put out there.
So we're just talking innovation, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's been great is the Liberal government came out with a pledge for $2 billion, but instead of just dispersing it, it did go to the community. It did go to the accelerators, the clean technology firms, and so forth, and engage them around where that money should go. And the clean tech companies and associations actually wrote letters in that advocating for specific components of where that money should go. And the Liberal government listened to them in several areas, and I think you'll find maybe the clean tech folks think not in others. But they've made massive steps forward. What's continuing, though, is the education. So a lot of clean technology companies, again, small, right? They're small startups. They're worrying about the day-to-day cash flow, right? Are not necessarily, don't understand where they can access funds, how to access those funds. But what you're seeing is the government and even organizations like us engage the industry to educate them on this. And then vice versa, you're seeing the technology companies engaging the government around how they can better help them. So, and there's always a friction there, right? It's always a tension, and things don't go as fast as you want, but things are starting to pick up because the financial sector is getting involved. So we have a big conference called Globe Capital that focuses on the intersection of infrastructure, investment, and clean innovation. And here we bring the banks and the pension funds and the insurance companies together with clean technology companies, government, to talk about how we mobilize and accelerate that deployment of capital. And what you're seeing is that the banks, the finance, the pension funds, the insurance companies are getting interested in this. They want to put money into our clean tech innovation sector. They want to put money into clean innovation at large, or sustainable infrastructure. And that's fascinating. That's a big change in the game from my standpoint, being in it for so long, that we haven't seen before, is the interest of the financial institutions to now address climate change and to get involved in putting their money into clean tech innovation.
All right, so going along this, the finance issue and the finance interest, let me read over here some of the things that the government has announced in terms of investment. So it says $2 billion low carbon economy fund to support provincial and territorial actions to reduce emissions by 2030. It says $22 billion to support green infrastructure, including electricity, renewable energy, and support for northern and remote communities. Then it says $20 billion to support urban public transit, and over $2.2 billion in funding for clean technology initiatives, financing clean tech firms. So on the one hand, talk about the financial sector and investments, but we also see clearly here the government also trying to make investments. So what are the mechanisms here? How does this work? And if you could tell us also how, at the level of different governments, provincial and municipal levels, how these interact with these sort of federal level initiatives, and where do you see more advances in how these are being used? What are the mechanisms in how these actually get concretized into transforming the economy?
Right. So the different initiatives that Paola mentioned they're quite different in their focus. So for example, the 2.2 billion is money that went into BDC, EDC, SDTC that I talked about to really scale clean technologies, okay, in deployment and demonstration. The infrastructure fund is the infrastructure bank, which will actually leverage private sector financing. And this is a key, right? Is that governments, what we want governments to do is infuse dollars to kickstart things. They've always done it. It's part of the market practice that they've always done. And we want them to infuse dollars into research and development and helping scale technologies and be a first user demonstrator and so forth. But they also want to make sure that they're leveraging that money, right, with private sector investment. So the money, the infrastructure bank, for example, is applications will come in for green infrastructure projects, right, which will transit, let's say, mass transit or that, and they will look to multiply the amount of money that they put into a project from, say, a pension plan. And these are the types of innovative financing mechanisms that we want to see. So ways that risk from the government is lowered by private sector engagement. Okay, and that can happen if it's done well. It can help not only the taxpayers but also the private sector and, more importantly, the user. If it's not done well, then we have some challenges, which we've seen in the past.
So continuing with this, the idea of the bottom-up processes is very much characteristic, let's say, of the climate change agreement. So Canada sets out these plans, but so can you take us lower down to provincial and municipal level in terms of how they are establishing commitments and plans and acting on this? And it would be good for us to learn also how do you, because you work Canada-wide, how things look in different provinces. Where do you see, some provinces moving faster in turning things around? Or do you see this more at the municipal level where things are turning around faster? That this would be, I think, for us, because we're, Montreal, we're in Quebec. Yes, we have Canada-wide and international perspective, but you're really moving in this world across provinces. So tell us what you're seeing. And then at the end, you can tell us how Quebec is doing in relation to others. So where do you see us? Yeah.
So it's always, so when you get involved, when you get to the political level, as you all know, it gets really fuzzy and it changes fast, right? So if you go back just 5-7 years during the Harper government time, federally, we weren't going anywhere. I would contend the government didn't even understand the science it discarded the science of climate change. And so what you saw is this swell from municipalities, Vancouver, Montreal, taking the lead along with a number of provinces, BC, Alberta, Quebec, right, cap and trade, and taking the leadership role in driving forward actions and policies around climate change. The sad thing is that we have this wave of populism that has come up here, and we now have some provincial governments, Ontario and possibly soon Alberta, that are pushing back now, and we're taking steps back. In Ontario, Premier Ford basically disbanded the cap and trade without any analysis whatsoever. It was just a vendetta, in my opinion. And that's not what we need, right? That is not what we need at all. To take action, and it doesn't matter what political stripe you are, to take action, we need to put a price on carbon. That can be in various forms. It can be a cap and trade, it can be a carbon tax, it can be a regulation. A regulation is still a price, okay? But we need a price on things. That's the mainstay of making change. If we have to pay more for something, then we will change our behavior, generally. And so it's critical now that we start to figure out ways that we align with these governments and with the politicians to ensure that the policies we're putting forward to them are aligned with their objectives. And it's a funny thing because carbon tax, carbon price is actually a conservative policy that puts a price so that the market then makes the change, right? So if you put a price on carbon dioxide emissions, then people change their behavior and the market changes along with it. So there are lots of people trying to work with those governments and sort of turn them back to show that this is a positive for Canada, and it's a positive for our industries, and it's a positive for individuals like us who are now feeling the climate change impacts. I'm from Ottawa, and we had 6 tornadoes land in our city. I've lived there 25 years, and I can only remember one on the outskirts of Ottawa before that. So, and that's going to be the norm.
So you highlighted, in a sense, some regression, let's say, in some cases. What about, where do you see
the progression.
Progression,
yeah.
Yes.
So the progression is happening. What's great is you can go down into the depths pretty quickly if you read like I do the science and so forth. But all you have to do is turn to communities, to individual actions, right? To even provinces, like province of Quebec is going forward with its cap and trade and continuing that, right? It's got a policy in place. I think it's 15% electric vehicles. These types of policies are progressive. And what's great is no matter what happens at the political level, you still see individuals innovating, right? And being positive, creating new technology, and companies trying to make a difference. And there's a lot of good stuff going on.
And do you see a division of labor? I'm wondering, we talk green economy, there are many sectors, clean technology, many sectors. Do you see certain things that are being done at the municipal level or where more possibilities in certain sectors at the municipal level, like when we talk about public infrastructure, which is one of the points that is highlighted here in the plan, urban public transit, 20 billion to support. So where would the initiatives come for that? Would that be?
So if you take municipalities, right, they're at the front lines of us, and so I'm always a believer that they have the biggest impact to do community initiatives. On the negative side, adaptation is best, with municipalities and policies. But the implementation of, as you said, mass transit, right, biking lanes, right. If they could change some things, fuel taxes, right. Building codes tend to be either federally or provincially, but as we saw in Vancouver, I believe they made some changes on their own. And Vancouver or Montreal is doing a lot of great stuff. Vancouver's sort of the leader in North America to see what they can do. Provincially, you're responsible for the implementation of the regulation. So that's where cap and trade, although I'd prefer a cap and trade nationally, but cap and trade, carbon pricing can be implemented. Again, I'm a federalist in the sense that I think we should have a national cap and trade or a national price because we're all one country. And together, if you have a cap and trade, it allows you a bigger market to move the credits, right, across the country. So each level of government plays a role, just like industry does and consumers do, to move this or to solve this challenge. Yeah.
All right. So one of the issues with bottom-up is the flexibility that it gives you to make the plans as in areas in which you see most relevant. At the same time, that can also lead to a lot of very local initiatives that are not learning from what others are doing in other localities. So I'm wondering, is there a way in which your organization, or are there others who are promoting more learning across municipalities or across provinces, across companies to learn from whatever those local initiatives are being created?
Yeah. There's lots of group, well, either conferences or convening sessions like we put on, but there's local groups, even in McGill, the guys are bringing together different departments, different people to talk and share lessons learned. FCM puts on, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities puts on a conference every year. The Great Lakes Council, Economic Council, I think they're called, put on another event to share among municipalities. So there's lots of forums to exchange, and there's so much information online or, online that you can get to advance your knowledge in this and best practices, both nationally, right, but also internationally, because different jurisdictions, Europe is much more advanced in sustainability reporting, I would say sustainable finance, in some of the municipal areas, not necessarily others where we're better at other things.
So. You mentioned knowledge, and this makes me think about us, the university, McGill University, our faculty, where we're also obviously facing the challenge also of how do we prepare better professionals. Where do you see major gaps in the skills that we need today, and where do you see major gaps in the kinds of professionals that firms, governments, NGOs require, so that we can better address both innovation as well as mitigation, adaptation, all of these issues? So what's your thinking, and what do we need to do in our university?
So I think one great trend I'm seeing is more of an interdisciplinary approach, is that it's essential nowadays that young people come out with a multitude of skills. So if you're in a business school, that you take other courses, basic on science and engineering, just a basic one, a sociology course, a marketing course, right? Different types of courses so you understand how people work, because organizations are not all engineers, or not all business students, or not all art students, right? But to solve the problem, we all have to come together, and we need to understand the different perspectives. And I think most people around here that are here with gray hair like me know, right, as you get older, you start to realize that, geez, my perspective is not had by everybody else. I don't understand, but, and so you need to understand how people think. That's one. Two is that it's not necessarily a gap, but it's an opportunity that I believe universities, now again, I'm biased, but all universities, all disciplines, all students should be taking a course on the basics of sustainability and something about climate change, all of them. And it's very easy to implement within the curriculum. And I know that's a tough area to get into. We tried it at several universities where we developed climate change plans for them. And curriculum development or change was the hardest. But that is fundamental, because we have to get the young people understanding the changes that need to be had. So talking about the transition, right? And what does that mean? If we transition. Soft skills, of course, are number one for me. If you've got a university education, you're smart. You know how to learn. But the interpersonal skills, presentation skills, business case, i.e., putting together, articulating why this is of value to someone, are all really critical skills. And I encourage young people all the time to get a mentor, even when they're in school, to start to understand the nuances, right, of politics in the office, different components of making a business case, right, presenting to a CEO, or getting a union on board to things. So those are some.